Hello and welcome to the version 1.11 installation tutorial. My name is Tuomas, I am the head developer of ETS2 LA. I have to give special thanks to one of our developers, Class42, who's made most of the key plugins shown in this video. I've provided captions and timestamps, so please use them extensively. Oh, by the way, there's a preview of 2.0 at the end, so if you're here just for that, please skip to the timestamp shown here. So let's now get to the tutorial. Unlike a few months ago, we now have an easy to use installer. You can find the download link for this in the video description or on the GitHub page shown on the screen right now. After downloading the installer from SourceForge, just start it. At this point, it's also important to note that if for some reason the installer does not work or your antivirus software blocks it, there are also manual installation instructions located on the wiki. You can find this in the description as usual. These basically run through what the installer would do, but you will have to run the commands manually. The installer will download the correct Python and Git versions. If you already have both installed, then it will continue straight on to the timestamp shown here. Even though the installer will download the correct Python version, it cannot uninstall versions that are too new. For example, with Python 3.12, they implemented features that break most of the older code in modules that we rely on. If the installer doesn't warn you about this, then you can skip to the next chapter at the timestamp. To uninstall, we need to head over to the Windows settings, go to the installed apps page and locate Python. Once you've located it, please uninstall it. Also note that for simplicity, if you have multiple Python versions already installed, you should just uninstall them all. After this is done and you restart the installer, it will automatically install the correct version of Python. Just make sure that you have Add Python to Path toggle selected. The installer will now ask to be restarted. After you've done this, it will start downloading Git. For the Git setup, you can just press next through all the options unless you know what you're doing, but in that case you probably already have Git installed. After one more restart, it's finally time to download and install the app. Especially the Python module installation will take a long time. So please be patient, we cannot make it any faster. You can now run the app for the first time. During the first startup, it will discover all the present plugins and prompt you to install them. This might take some time depending on your internet speed. You can close the app by exiting the terminal or using the close button in the app window. Usually, if the app becomes unresponsive, you can always close it using the terminal. In normal operation though, you should use the in-app close button since that allows us to save what we need to. The installer will also create two new start menu entries. One is used to start the app and the other is used to uninstall it. You can also navigate to the install directory and run the run file or uninstall files by yourself. You should now go over to the first time setup. Most of the settings here are simple enough to understand without me going over them. You should, however, pay attention when setting up the API. If the app found your ETS2 or ATS installation automatically, then you don't have to locate it manually. If it didn't find your game, then you can press the navigate button and select the root folder of your game. Make sure that the app understands the game's files by checking that the flag after the path is true. If it says false, then you should retry with a different path. You can then click the install button, and as long as it says success, open the game after. On startup, the game will now prompt you about advanced SDK features. Clicking OK will allow the app to communicate with your game. If the first time setup does not automatically detect a connection, then close it with the middle mouse button and open it again. You can then head over to the next page to open the navigation detection setup. If you don't have a middle mouse button for some reason, you can also use the right mouse button by enabling that option in the settings. To continue on, you'll have to have your game in the windowed mode, so head over to the settings and please disable full screen. If you're fine with the small gap at the bottom of the screen, then you can skip to the following timestamp or use the chapters. That gap can be removed with an application called Borderless Gaming. It will force any windowed application into a borderless mode, still allowing other applications on top. You can either download it from GitHub for free, or you can buy it off of Steam to support the developer. The setup itself is very straightforward. Just accept the license and install. After the installation is complete, you can pop ETS2 on the right side with the arrow, and after a second or two, the game will be in borderless mode. Once in the game, it's paramount that you do not have any overlays or HDR on. In addition, you must make sure that you zoom your minimap to the maximum zoom with F5. You can then open the automatic setup in the navigation detection settings. This will download and install a detection model that should technically automatically set the minimap position. However, quite often, as shown in the case here, it seems as though the bottom right of the arrow is not perfect. You can try and run the setup again. If it's still not perfect, then please use the manual setup instead. You can zoom in the manual setup by dragging the image. If you set your game to borderless, it should be perfect automatically. If it's not, then you can use the buttons on the top of the window to move the corners around. After confirming, the app will refresh and you can make sure all these plugins are enabled. After that, just hit enable, and if you're using a wheel, then this is all the setup you will need. The app should now just be able to drive for you. You can use any camera angle as long as the minimap is visible and in the same spot as during the original setup. If the minimap moves for some reason, you also have to redo the navigation detection setup. In the case that you use a controller instead of a wheel, you should change the in-game controller mode to wheel. You can also lower the sensitivity to make it easier to drive at high speeds. After that, it should just work just as it did before with wheels. Now, if you don't use a keyboard, so use a controller or a wheel, you can skip to the last chapter now for additional tips. Now, for keyboard users, this is what it looks like out of the box. It's not that nice, is it? The setup for keyboard users is a bit more complicated due to the limitations of ETS2. With 1.50 around the corner though, these might change, so before continuing you should check the pinned comment for additional information. There might also be changes to the setup procedure here. Essentially, what we need to do is to be able to set the controller subtype to wheel. Unfortunately, when selecting your controller as keyboard only, this is locked to gamepad and joysticks. We have two options here. Number one is to enable mouse steering. This will lock the controller type to wheel, but for some reason this might not work for everyone. Mouse steering is also not the most comfortable to use. The second option is to create a virtual controller so that the game thinks we can set the type to wheel. Luckily, we have included this option in the app. Please open the plugin manager and enable V-Gamepad controller. You should hear the Windows device connected sound as long as your app is still enabled. Now we can head back to the game, select the new controller that was just added to the list, then set the subtype to wheel and lower the sensitivity for more comfortable driving. Now open the app again and disable V-Gamepad. The game might warn about input devices not being found, just ignore this. If you fail to ignore it, then you have to enable V-Gamepad again as the game will reset the controllers. This will leave you with a fake virtual controller and the subtype set to wheel. The app should now be able to steer for you, but please do note that your steering with the keyboard will be extremely sensitive. Pay attention, especially on the highways. To make the app control your speed too, you can enable the cruise control plugin. There's also a traffic light detection plugin that will attempt to stop at traffic lights automatically. Please do note that TLD uses a lot of power, so it requires a more performant PC to run at reasonable frame rates. The cruise control plugin itself just uses the inbuilt adaptive cruise control. It does not slow down for vehicles going under 30 km an hour. And over that, we are also reliant on the game detecting the obstacles ahead. We are working on this, but progress is slow due to the limited information allowed to be gathered from the game. We also have a plugin called Truck Stats that will show relevant information about your driving. The most useful of these is probably the real-time left counter. The accuracy of this does depend on the game and it's not entirely up to us. Usually it's fairly accurate during highway driving. That's it for the setup. For any additional questions, comments, bug reports, support, etc., please do join the Discord server in the description. I do check YouTube comments, but it's not all that often, so for faster support, just join the Discord. I want to also thank the people who supported me on Ko-Fi, these being Sneaky91, Sir Meme, KS, Ubi Repairs, and especially FlexFlexen, whose donations allowed me to buy the books that resulted in me getting an excellent score at our national maths exam. Thank you so much to all of you. Special thanks also go out to all the developers and testers helping us with the development. Now, before I go, I'll give you a preview of 2.0. It's still going to be many months away, but hopefully this is the future of ETS2 LA.